Hey guys, what's going on? It is your good buddy Sam, and it's time for another Friday Max for Live Spotlight. This week, we're going to be looking at a device called the Envelope Follower. It's a device that ships with Ableton Live 9 or Live Suite or Max for Live or whatever. So point being, if you have Max for Live, you already have the Envelope Follower. It might sound a little bit boring, but because we didn't go out and download some crazy device from some forgotten corner of the internet. But I would counter by saying it's not boring. It's just familiar. It's comfortable. It's hot cocoa. It's a warm blanket. It's the cast of Fox and Friends. It's something that you love and that makes you feel happy. So why not get to know it a little bit better and some of the cool stuff that it can do? So let's start just by talking plain. What is the Envelope Follower? It's a device that takes an audio signal, extracts the loudness, and turns that loudness into something that you can use to control other stuff within Live. Say, for example, so in this track here, I've got, this is an award-winning clip from my latest award-winning album. It sounds like this. And I've thrown the Envelope Follower into this track, and you can see what it does. So as the drum is playing, the Envelope Follower is extracting the envelope and drawing this curve. These parameters down here affect how the sound draws the curve. The gain here doesn't actually boost the signal, but just boosts the envelope itself. Rise and fall here control how fast the signal rises and falls. A large fall, for example, will add a long tail to the sound, like you can see here. Short fall means really fast tail, large fall means really long tail. And delay here actually puts some delay between the sound itself and the envelope that's extracted from it. So that's all well and good, but the cool part about the Envelope Follower, excuse me, is the stuff down here at the bottom. This lets you map the envelope to any other parameter, well, not any other parameter, but any parameter that exists within an effects chain in Live. So I click this little X to clear the mapping. This map button, you click it, starts blinking, and the next thing you click will be mapped to this envelope. So if I click on the cowbell loudness here, for example, and then start playing, you can see the envelope is affecting the loudness of this cowbell. This 7 and 0, these are percents here. So this is saying map a quiet envelope to 7%, map a loud envelope to 0%. That's why this cowbell is barely moving. If I make this the full range, 0 to 100, you'll see the cowbell jump every time that drum kick comes in. So that's the basic idea behind the Envelope Follower. Let's look at some of the cool stuff that it can do. So, first example, say you had some nice, lovely synth strings here, like this award-winning loop right here. And you wanted to add a little bit of interest, a little bit of motion to any one of those synth sounds. One thing you might do, for example, is add a little bit of distortion. This is just using the erosion effect built into Live. Got to turn off the Envelope Follower here really quick. This is just adding a little bit of buzzing, distortion to that synth. So that's cool. The distortion makes it a bit more interesting, but it's static. One thing we could do is add automation curves to the track, of course, but you can also use the Envelope Follower to automatically map the loudness of your strings to this distortion. So what I'm going to do is activate the Envelope Follower, click Map, then click on Amount here, and now the loudness of this string is mapped to the amount of this erosion distortion. And let's listen to what that sounds like. So that's nice. It adds a little bit of motion, a little bit of dynamics to the effect, and just makes our pad a little bit more interesting. Cool, so that's one thing you can do. Another thing that's, I think, a little bit more interesting, actually modifying some kind of sound parameter is the obvious thing to do, but you can also use the Envelope Follower to actually generate sounds. For example, if you're working with MIDI effects. So MIDI effects in Live let you take MIDI notes and then modify those MIDI notes before they're actually used to generate sound. Here, for example, I've got a clip. It's just 2 notes in a being played in this kind of nylon guitar simulator. The first MIDI effect I've got in this track is this chord MIDI effect that just takes a single note and turns it into a chord. And then on top of that, I've got this arpeggiator effect that while this note is held, instead of just holding the note, actually turns it into a series of repeated notes. That sounds like this. And finally, I've got this note length this note length device here. Just turning off the envelope so I can actually show you what this does. I've got this note length device here that lets me modify the length of the MIDI notes that are coming in. So this is very short length, obviously. And as I increase this, the notes get longer and longer. So one thing that's really cool about this is that we can use this note length as kind of a way to add rhythm to this, a changing rhythm to this very sort of rhythmically static clip. So what I'm going to do is take an audio clip like this one. This is a sample from, I think it's Vessel. Oh, but I've turned the track off. Cool, so there's the track, and here's the envelope that's being extracted from it. So all I'm going to do is click on Map, and then click on this length parameter here. And now the envelope extracted from this drum loop is going to affect how long the notes are in this guitar sample. And it's a little bit hard to hear what's happening to the guitar while the drum here is playing. But if I turn, you can actually, the cool thing about the envelope follower is you can actually deactivate that track, or at least, mute that track, but the envelope can still be extracted. So you can actually use a full audio effect stack, whatever, just to generate an envelope if you want to. But anyway, now you can hear, we've kind of got this riff going with the guitar from extracting the envelope from this other track. And if you modulate these, gain, rise, fall, you can kind of play a little bit with what that sounds like. Anyway, I think that's a pretty interesting example of some of the stuff you can do with the envelope follower. Of course, you can also just use the envelope follower for things like, straight up sound design. Say, for example, we had an audio sample that sounded a little bit something like this. Gotta undo all the nonsense I've done to this, but say you had an audio sample like this.
Well, the good news is we don't have to worry about these alligators. Well, the good news is...
I'm gonna start just by, let's see, I'm gonna reverse that. And then just pitch it down 8 semitones so it sounds a little bit less recognizable. H. John Benjamin is a pretty recognizable voice, so if you use his voice as a sample, pro tip, if you use H. John Benjamin's voice as a sample, be sure to disguise it heavily if you don't want it to be recognized. Anyway, so having done that, it's possible just because I have no taste, but one effect I really like is the sound of really short filter delays that I've got just by making this delay time-based rather than sync-based, and making the delay time really short, like less than 50 milliseconds. So that you get a lot of, it goes from being a rhythmic delay or a time domain delay to actually a comb filter. I think it sounds really cool, especially if you modulate that delay time. Which I'm going to do with the envelope follower. So first I'm going to turn on this, this is just a limiter, a gate, to get rid of some of the noise in that sample. So here's what that sounds like. And then I'm going to turn on the envelope follower and map it to the delay time here on this filter. And I like this because the envelope gives it this nice kind of tail to the filter. You'll hear what I mean. I think it sounds really cool. What does it sound like with these drums, I wonder? Well, it sounds really stupid with the drums, but I think that sound itself sounds pretty cool and could be a good starting point for something more interesting. Okay, last example I want to talk about. You can also use the envelope follower in some unexpected and really interesting ways. So one thing that I really like to do, I like to use the simpler, and I like to make the loop really short because it kind of turns individual note events into these sort of two-part things where you have first the sample and then this kind of glitchy loop right at the end. So here's what that sounds like, you know what I'm talking about. So you can hear the sample happens and then there's this really short loop at the end that it sounds like kind of this buzzing. And one thing that you can do, for example, is map the length of that loop. The length of that loop determines its pitch to some extent, and so if you modulate that, you can get some really cool effects. And this is just going to be using that drum sample from the very beginning. I'm just going to map that to the loop length here in Simpler, and you'll see that if I play those drums, it's going to actually change that loop length in a really interesting way. We could even change the delay time, like changing this to 1/8 note. Maybe it creates a little bit more rhythmic interest. What else could you do? You can modulate some other stuff and see what happens. We could even, like, another thing that's cool about the envelope follower, there's no reason you can't use two of them if you want to map two different parameters. Maybe let's map this one to the filter frequency here. Increase the resonance a bit. See what this sounds like. Gonna have to change these a little bit. Maybe not totally working, but at least it's an interesting starting point. So there you go. 4 cool examples of some interesting stuff that you can do with the envelope follower. I hope this has encouraged you to go back and look at what might be one of the most overlooked devices in live, as far as I know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, I look forward to seeing you next week for another Friday Max for Live Spotlight. All right, guys, take it easy. See you around.